Before we talk wrestling, I want to talk about a high and a low from my sporting passions from this weekend. It wasn't the results, but two human acts that were from opposite ends of how people should act when in public. I greeted last Saturday midnight going into Sunday by watching my favourite EPL team, West Ham, when they travelled to one of their London rivals, Crystal Palace. We won 2-0, which is a better start to the season than last week. By the way, I also have a West Ham dedicated show called the Southern Joe West Ham Show, where I'll be doing a full rundown of this match and much more. But the win wasn't the high point, although it was satisfying. It was when Thomas Souček, he scored our first goal and he did his famous helicopter celebration and was heading towards the away supporters to show them love. Now, as the Hammers fans surged forward to congratulate our lads, the advertising hoarding gave way. Souček and our captain Jared Bowen stopped celebrating because they saw that one of Palace's young ball boys was underneath the falling fencing, and they saved the boy from being crushed under the massive weight of people and the ad board hoarding itself. From adversity, there came a nice moment from our guys saving that young fella. But roll on Sunday afternoon. My AFL team, Carlton, were playing St Kilda in a game that if we won, we were guaranteed to play in the finals. Now, that's our version of the playoffs for you American folk. If we lost and Fremantle won their game that would start after ours, then they would leapfrog over us and claim the eighth and final playoff berth or finals berth. Now, we lost by 2 points. Now, that wasn't the lowest point. And we still qualified for the finals because Freo lost anyway. And the umpiring in our game was pretty bad. Some of the decisions that went against us were very dubious, and that's being kind. That wasn't the lowest point. The lowest point came when a goal umpire was struck in the back of the head by someone throwing a full bottle of water at him. This is pretty low. I hope the culprit is caught and banned for life, but I also hope that this person realises the gravity of such a terrible action. Time to start the show. Look, by the way, I am now an affiliate marketer for WWE merchandising. For what it's worth, if you're looking to buy genuine WWE merchandising, why not use the code which will appear below, as well as in the description of this episode. Look out for future shorts where I'll be featuring the latest and greatest in WWE merch. G'day wrestling mates, and welcome to another episode of If You See Kayfabe with your wrestling mate from Down Under, Southern Joe. As far as the affiliate marketing bit goes, I've also emailed AEW about whether they also have such a program, but have not had a response yet. To any folk who have checked out the previous episodes, a big thank you. It's humbling that you're willing to give me a go. All feedback is welcome, and if there's a particular subject that you would like me to see me cover or give an opinion on, please let me know in the comments below. I encourage all of you to share the show with your wrestling mates and also press like and subscribe and hit the notification ding-dong so you know when new episodes are live. I'll talk about AEW's latest pay-per-view and the plans to bring a stadium show to Australia later on. But first, I started formulating a tribute to Kevin Sullivan on his recent passing. Now, I delayed it because I wanted the previous episode to be focused on SummerSlam. But now it's time to acknowledge the passing of a legend of pro wrestling. Now, we didn't get much NWA, WCW programming here in Australia until basically the Nitro days of the mid-90s. I really only knew Mr. Sullivan from the wrestling magazines. Now, these magazines weren't always readily available here in Australia, but I got hooked on them once I found publications like Pro Wrestling Illustrated and so forth, and what became known as the APTA mags, and a couple of other magazines that I could lay my hands on. I can't say I was a fan of the character Kevin Sullivan, and this is because I'm not a fan of dark characters myself. Hence why I was never enamoured with the Undertaker character or the evolution of the Bray Wyatt character. But with the advent of podcasts and YouTube shows, it became clear that Kevin Sullivan not only made the most of his limited physical stature, he was only 5'9" or 1.75 metre tall, but was also a brilliant mind for crafting the booking and creative side of the business. He wrestled big because he had a barrel chest from his powerlifting exploits. He was probably most famous for putting together the stables like the Varsity Club, which featured Mike Rotunda, Steve Williams, and Rick Steiner as university heels, and also the Dungeon of Doom that featured folks such as Meng, formerly Haku, Zodiac, who was Brutus Beefcake, and Kamala, the Ugandan Giant. He also had a love triangle feud with Chris Benoit over Sullivan's then wife Nancy, known as Woman. That became so real that Nancy left Sullivan in real life to end up marrying Benoit. Now, for those of you out there that want to perpetuate this stupid theory that Kevin Sullivan had something to do with the Benoit tragedy, please just stop. Let us simply celebrate an underrated legend of the game who knew his role and elevated others. Now, following on the recent passing of Roman Reigns' father, Wild Samoan Sika, Sika's brother Arthur Anoa'i passed away after a battle with illness. Now, shame on Dave Meltzer for prematurely announcing this death. It also seems indicative of Dave's craven need to be first with the news without actually verifying its source. He's been caught out on many times on these instances, especially recently, but I'll leave it at that, as he's been piled on by others. Back to Arthur. As one of the Wild Samoans, not only was he one half of one of the greatest tag teams of all time, not just one of the greatest brother teams, but he was a champion for Islander wrestlers and paved the way for a slew of great Islander greats like Superfly Jimmy Snuka, Haku, or Meng, if you will, Yokozuna, Umaga, and of course Roman Reigns and The Rock. Arthur also ran his own training facility with Sika and was still active in the business until illness took over in the last few years. He and his brother rightfully take their place in the WWE Hall of Fame. Arthur died just 3 months short of his 81st birthday and less than 2 months after the passing of his dear brother, Sika. Now, it is with a heavy heart that we've just learned that very recently, as this episode drops, that Sid Udy passed away after a battle with cancer at just 63 years old. Sid was most known for his WCW run as Sid Vicious and his WWE run as Psycho Sid and Sid Justice. He began wrestling in 1987 when he debuted in the Continental Wrestling territory as the Masked Lord Humongous. He was quite successful there, and this led to a stint in Texas with World Class Championship Wrestling, where he borrowed the name Sid Vicious from the punk rocker of the same name. He carried this name to WCW, where he formed a formidable tag team called the Skyscrapers with Danny Spivey. This was a great big man team, as both men were about 6'8" or thereabouts and were quite mobile. Sid went on to become Sid Justice in the WWE, or WWF at the time, and that was after a stint as one of the Four Horsemen just before he left WCW. Sid has been both WCW and WWF World Champ during his career, as well as a slew of regional titles. I always saw him as a believable monster. He was well built, and that square jaw meant that he had a good look for the camera. He also had loads of charisma. Sid passed away after losing his battle with cancer at just 63. Vale to him. Time for a short break, then let's talk All Elite. So So during all the promotional work for All Elite's second annual All In pay-per-view at Wembley Stadium in London, Tony Khan announced that he had 2 stadium shows planned for 2025. One will be in Texas and one will be All Elite's first show here in Australia. Now, I believe the Australian show will be a success compared to the Texas show for most of the same reasons I knew that Wembley would be a success. Last year, All In at Wembley had 2 things going for it. It seemed at that stage it was a one-off show for the UK fans to see live, so they took the opportunity. Also, last year's event had more star power. The only misstep I can see with the Australian show is that it's in the wrong city, and it's on at the wrong time of year for that city. So AEW Grand Slam will be at Brisbane Suncorp Stadium, February 15, 2025. I guess the name is a borrow from tennis, as the Australian Open will have just finished up 2 weeks prior. Melbourne is traditionally a better drawing city for sport, and Marvel Stadium, which used to be known as Etihad, Colonial and other naming rights, has a roof, so if the weather turns, the 55,000 capacity, if they sell out, will stay dry. So I wanted to see as much of the All-In pay-per-view as I could, but I didn't have the time nor the budget to buy the event. So I found a highlights package that was heavily edited with random edits. So if I miss anything crucial, so be it. The highlights didn't include 0 Hour, so let's get straight into the first pay-per-view bout. A London ladder trios match. Christian Cage, along with Patriarch members Nick Wayne and Killswitch, were taking on the Blackpool Combat Club, as well as the Bang Bang Gang of Juice Robinson and the Gun Boys, and the House of Black, Malachi Black, Aussie Buddy Matthews, and Brody King. Obviously, a match like this one, where people will dart out of nowhere to foil each other's attempts to get the title belts and they were hanging up high, and there'll be plenty of high spots and high risk of legit injury. The fans got into this one, and eventually the House of Black regained the trios titles. Another Aussie, Timeless Toni Storm, defended her AEW women's title against Mariah May. I mentioned before that I'm not fond of women's wrestling, and I'm definitely not a fan of women bleeding. But just to let you know that May captured the title from Storm. Chris Jericho, under his umpteenth gimmick change as the Learning Tree, was defending the so-called FTW title against the young, charismatic, second-generation star Hook. Jericho was making sure that his lackeys Big Bill and Brian Keith intervened to gain as much advantage as possible. The most notable spot came late when Hook trapped Jericho in the Kata Hajime and Keith attempted to interfere. Taz, who was announcing, left his announce table and he trapped Brian Keith in his own version of the same move and watched as his son tapped out Jericho to win the match and win the FTW title. Taz and son Hook embraced in the middle of the ring afterwards, a touching moment. Next up was the Young Bucks defending the AEW tag titles against my favourite 2 teams in all of wrestling at the moment, FTR and the Acclaimed. Now I found something about the Bucks I actually like. Those Sgt. Pepper-inspired ring jackets were very striking. Shame can't be said for the way they are in the ring. Even if they retained, well, of course they did, EVPs and all that. They were the weak link in that match. FTR is still by far the best tag team going today. It's Daylight second, then the Acclaimed. Next was the Casino Gauntlet match. If the Royal Rumble and the Money in the Bank match had a love child, this match would be the result. A gauntlet match where the winner gets a guaranteed title shot. First one out was Orange Cassidy. He was followed by Okada, and then Nigel McGuinness made an in-ring return to a very generous home country pop. Kyle O'Reilly was next, followed by Zack Sabre Jr. Roddy Strong, Mark Briscoe, and Hangman Page all came out after that. Jeff Jarrett was next, coming out with his wife Karen. Ricochet was half a surprise. He had been rumoured to be signing with AEW, but he received one of the best pops of the night. He also stole the match with his explosive moves. Christian Cage and Luchasaurus came out last. Now, Luchasaurus was teasing an end to his relationship with Cage, as well as ditching the kill switch gimmick. This was a ruse, as he flattened O'Reilly, so as Cage would win the match and a guaranteed title shot. What many thought would be the main event was actually fourth last. Now, local healer Will Ospreay was looking to regain his title, which was the international title from MJF, who had renamed it the AEW American title, an overly clever and cheesy heel USA Patriot gimmick. The build-up featured a heavy dose of the will he or won't he use the Tiger Driver 91. That's referring to Will Ospreay, who said he had retired the move after injuring Bryan Danielson with it previously. The build-up also had MJF trying to convince the crowd that he was still the best, despite the fact that he was now a heel. This match told the best in-ring story that AEW has told in a very long time. If more on the roster could replicate this in their own style, AEW can stop becoming WWE light from the late McMahon era. Late in the match, MJF was looking to nail Will with a set of brass knucks, but an unknown wrestler clad in black foiled that effort. This unknown wrestler revealed himself to be Daniel Garcia. This was the best match with what was the best result for the UK crowd. Ospreay beat MJF, and guess what? Ospreay used the Tiger Driver 91 in a way for the win. After the match, Ospreay doesn't want to touch the American Championship, and Christopher Daniels presents him with the International Championship. Mercedes Moné proved why she is the most overrated wrestler going around today, as she looked to retain her TBS Women's Championship against the returning Dr. Britt Baker DMD. I can really see why people like Cornette and Bischoff diss Moné. Her routine, stepping out of the limo and doing that dance or whatever it was, makes it easy to see why this match had zero fan engagement. Mercedes retains. That's all that needs to be said. Next up was a TNT title match between Jack Perry, who recently remade the title belt by handcrafting a replacement belt, defending his handiwork against Darby Allin in Darby's specialty match, a coffin match. Perry was continuing his scapegoat routine, even showering the ring with glass at one stage, while the crowd chanted, "Cry me a river." Now, CM Punk may have been watching on with Larry and April, turning to them and saying, "Meh." Darby had thumbtacks glued to his face. Maybe he ran out of face paint. Sting made a spectacular return to save Darby from a possible inferno after the Bucks interfered, but Perry prevailed and retained. It was then time for the main event. It was title versus career. Swerve Strickland was putting up his AEW World title against the career of the soon-to-be-retired anyway, Bryan Danielson. Now, if Danielson loses, his farewell tour will finish there and then. This was another good match. It made sense, and Swerve went back to his heelish ways. He was beating down on Danielson right in front of Danielson's family, especially with his little girl crying. Hangman Page jumped the guardrail towards the end in an attempt to interfere, but in the end, Danielson label locked Swerve for a memorable submission win and became All Elite World Champ. Now, I wish All Elite ran the same business model as WWE, so I can watch pay-per-views without having to pay extra. This looked like a fun show. The women matches aside, especially Monet. And the fact that there were so many multi-person matches meant that many on the roster got a payday. I liked what I saw and hope they can follow up with better TV shows than what's been served up lately. Finally, I'd like to give shout outs to folk who have helped this show recently without even knowing it. Now, I've stopped using Zoom and now use Riverside FM. The video quality is better, especially since I got a brand new 4K webcam from Temu, which I'm using now. Riverside FM will also help in future interviews as I won't have time limits, and everything I use with them is for free. Now, speaking of free, my editing setup is the free version of DaVinci Resolve. It's really chock full of great features, some that I'm still discovering. My theme music is by Lost European, and it's a track called An Illusion. Let's have them take us out as usual. Till next time, hooroo!